Yeah, so this talk is called Open Source, Open Revenue, How to Take on Big Tech. This is a modified version of one I gave earlier this week at Governance Day, which was a great event earlier in the week at Buenos Aires. So the current mood today is pretty bleak out there. If you look at the governance world, it's like governance is dead. People aren't too ecstatic about DAOs these days. The same thing kind of applies to open source. There's this just assumption that open networks cannot compete with centralized platforms. That may be the current mood, but if we look at the current state of the world, we still have very centralized platforms. We have a couple cloud companies that own our data, control and gatekeep everything. So what we're trying to do is figure out a system how we can attack that. So we rent our digital lives. I like to think that I'm using open source, but I'm just as guilty as everyone. I use the big tech platforms because they're fast and convenient. But this really is not true ownership. So if we look, our compute and storage, we rent from just a few cloud companies. If we look at our identity, this is locked in walled gardens. Everything is logged in with Google or logged in with one of these. These are controlled by centralized companies. Audience, people have followers on Twitter. People have different platforms where they're interacting with them. You do not control the access to your followers. It's Elon or whoever is running that platform that has access to those followers. Payments, of course, this is what kind of originally with crypto, that is still gate kept, and that's kind of one of the things we're trying to figure out. So when you have the rails of any of the digital world owned by a few companies, owned by centralized companies that end up having monopolies, eventually they will start extracting rent because you are paying to use their services. So we're trying to figure out a way that we can move away from rent extraction in our digital world. So how we got here, just kind of three different stories here. I think first, open source built a lot of the internet. A lot of the big, really successful open source projects in the 2010s, Kubernetes, all of these were really great projects, but unfortunately they were captured. All of the value was captured by big tech companies. And that's really what happened with the closed interfaces. So now everything is Microsoft benefiting and Apple benefiting rather than the open source infrastructure that founded that. The third place that we got here is there have been some attempts to try to solve this funding problem for open source software and for these common goods. But most of these deal with how to distribute funds better. So they are charity or donation based, where they will figure out how to redistribute funds to developers that are working on open source. This is great. We very much support it, but we need to figure out a way to better capture the value that open source creates and funnel it back into the open source development itself. Why software needs new economics. So software is just completely different than anything that has really existed before. We have this field of economics to help us to figure out how we can structure our societies better to lead to innovation. But software is just a completely different beast, and we need to rethink about how we're applying that in different ways. So there's near zero marginal cost. Code to reproduce code is like basically zero. There is a little bit of cost in terms of hosting, but we'll get to that in a second. Network effects. Software has the most powerful network effects in the world, and we really need to think about how we capture that network and design the systems within that network in a different way than an economy based on steel or something like that. And the last one is we have huge public goods that exist in software that really benefit all. This again, I think, is new to software. It's not that public goods existed elsewhere, but because we have so much that can be reproducible, we have these really strong common goods and public goods, and we need to figure out how we can fund them better. So this is probably impressive at this point to get to a talk and not say AI yet. AI is kind of like taking over everything here. And unfortunately, AI is just going to make this even worse. All of these issues of centralization on digital platforms is just going to be put into overdrive when we put AI in the mix. Inference costs will slowly take over the training ones, and therefore those that control those clouds will continue to have monopolies and be able to extract rent in a way that was even probably more so than you saw in the Web 2 era. So we were a little we're a little depressed. There hasn't been as much progress in some of the areas that we want. We have done some really cool things in the space here when it comes to open networks. I think Bitcoin and Ethereum are just incredible examples of how open networks can succeed. Ethereum is a coordination layer for a whole bunch of projects, and to just see, like, literally looking around and seeing what Ethereum has helped build, right? The coordination for all of this, everyone coming from all around the world, is just because people are coordinating around a blockchain, right? Coordinating around transferring value. We need to take that coordination that Ethereum and Bitcoin has achieved in terms of connecting a network all around the world and aligning on a single goal. We need to figure out how to take that coordination and apply it to the rest of open source. The DAO stall. So, as I get in my late 30s and I have my children, I've been smoking a lot of meat, and I was so I don't know if anyone smokes meat, like you cook barbecue or anything like that. But if you have like a big pork butt or any brisket, you know, it takes like 12, 15 hours to go, and so you're monitoring it the whole time. And the first 6 or 7 hours, the temperature is just really nicely increasing, and then about hour 7, it gets to the stall, as they call it. And it's just the same temperature for like 6 or 7 hours. It's still like getting cooked, it's still that, but it's just stalling. And it looks like nothing is happening over that time. But in reality, at that temperature, that's where the fats melt, and it really is doing a lot of work. So I kind of use this as an analogy for where I think we're at in the DAO space, right? So we're in the DAO stall right here. So we had a nice 6 or 7 years of kind of growing and innovation, but we've really stagnated in that time. And I would like to think it's not just a stagnation that is not being put to good use, but we are also melting the fats of the brisket and figuring out a way to move that forward. So what has kind of some of the problems that DAOs have faced in this DAO stall area? Governance without execution. People arguing on forums, people doing all sorts of things, but not actually just building projects, right? We have too much focus on how do we like make decisions and that, which are very important, but not enough on executing on that. Legal and jurisdiction risk. We had a great talk yesterday from Layer from Powerhouse that laid out all of the kind of some of the issues that DAOs face. And this is just prevent DAOs from really scaling and getting larger. Everyone, you know, I'm still going to pay my taxes. I'm going to still have to pay my mortgage. And if we want to have more people contributing to these open organizations, we need to solve these very thorny problems of like legal and jurisdictional risk. Volatile tokens killed budgeting. Tokens are difficult. And so we need to figure out how to have a more sustainable system that is, you know, allows folks to have more predictability in how they do that. And engagement theater, similar to the governance without execution. We really are rewarding maybe the wrong things when it comes to open organizations, and that's like showing up and just like engaging for the sake of engaging. So not a DAO, but so I this tweet from Nick from Hats Protocol. I don't know if people know Hats Protocol. I felt really seen by it. So he says, it's pretty revealing that everyone is trying to frame their thing as not a DAO, but a new thing. And that's kind of basically what I'm about to do in a second. So I feel very, very seen. But, you know, we have gotten to these, you know, the DAO journey has gone up and down, right? So the first thing, everyone wanted to be a DAO. 2020, it was like, oh my goodness, I'm going to be a DAO. This person's a DAO. And everyone kind of did that. And now we're at the other phase where people don't want any DAO at all, right? They're taking DAOs out of the names. They're trying to come up with something better. I'm not here to just rebrand DAOs. What I think we want to do is go back to that original vision of DAOs, right? Which is to create these open organizations and try to figure out a way to actually achieve that and execute on that vision. So the way we get there, this is a model that Powerhouse has been working on. We call it the scalable network organization. So it keeps the DAO there, but it separates the other things you need to support the DAO and to support the open organization and to be able to achieve those. But it still maintains decentralization because you're creating these entities that are linked back to the DAO rather than the entities having like the power accrue to them themselves. So the ones we have, of course, we still have the DAO. That's a decision-making community. We have an operational hub. This is responsible just for paying developers. Open source developers, contributors around the world. One of the biggest headaches is like, how do I get paid? How do I pay tax? And we need to figure out how to streamline that. So when people are contributing to open organizations, they don't have to just get an accountant. They don't have to go through all those hoops just to get paid and be compliant. So the operational hub sets that. The operational collateral fund is the investment layer. So this allows, this is a way of allocating capital, of taking in funds from investors and allocating capital to the ecosystem and in terms of projects to be able to innovate and go forward. Then we have the revenue generating hub. This is the sales arm of any organization. I like to think of it, it's what's actually going to be in the app store, which means it's going to be need to be locally compliant regulatory. And so you may have a bunch of these things, but this is just responsible for selling and monetizing the software there. And then we have an IP entity, which is really important because that will hold all of the IP of the project and it also manage the licenses. So all of this is kind of leading to a, mission or philosophy that we're calling like open source capitalism. So I have this open source capitalist shirt on here. And this kind of goes back to what I was saying before about how software is just a completely different beast. And we need to think about different ways to talk about it. So one of the reasons we came up with this term like open source capitalist, I think this is when we were talking about. I remember talking to our founder Prometheus and we were like, it was like, what do you think about when you think like open source? And I as an American, I think back to like the 1990s and like Linux and Bill Gates being like, those damn communists are trying to like break American capitalism with their open source. And I just think that like completely misses the mark. Open source is more innovative, it's more competitive, and it's better for consumers in the end. So it kind of changing the way we think about open source from something that is just a charity donation base to something that is actually like, that's what we need to be more innovative as a society. And that's the only thing, if we're going to be more, if we're going to try to take on big tech, you have to be more innovative. You have to create better products to do that. So open source capitalism is the way to do that. And the key thing that's been missing in open source development is this flywheel right here, right? So for any successful software project, you get some traction, maybe you get some revenue, and then that revenue starts flowing back and you can redevelop it, and then you're off to the races. This is missing in open source because we don't have the ability to capture value. So the key thing that Powerhouse is promoting and we're trying to push forward with open source capitalism is creating a way where open source software can capture more of the value it creates. So this comes from basically a dual license model. So you have a copyleft license. If you want to use the code, do whatever you want, that's totally fine. But if you are going to use the code to then monetize it and make money off of it, a portion of those funds need to flow back into the system. And that's where kind of these different entities come through as a way to flow that value back into the system there. So how do we do this? So Powerhouse is kind of like motivated by this ultimate vision of like, how do we build organizations around open source that can eventually take on big tech? And so we're building a couple different products and services that basically achieve that. So I'm actually going to start with the first one, like legal blueprints. Maybe this is the snow. I'm realizing as I put this presentation together that maybe we need to be productizing the structure that we're doing at Powerhouse a little bit more. So it's actually just kind of a product. But these are open standards, open legal templates, so anyone can quickly spin up a scalable network organization or spin up these entities. We talk a lot about open source as it relates to software, but the legal community is perhaps even more closed source. So figuring out a common standard structure that can allow people to easily set those up. So that's the first one. So that's what an open organization needs. The other two things, one, as an open organization, you need a place to manage your organization. You need a place to find builders. You need a place to post proposals and do that. And that's what we achieve through ACRA. So ACRA is we're calling it a global marketplace for coordination. So it's where organizations would come to submit work requests. It's where builders, designers, anyone would also come to find work. We handle all of the tax and compliance. We come out of Sky or MakerDAO, so we can do the stablecoin route. We can also do the banking route as people want to get it that way. So that's ACRA, and then Vetra is a way to build sovereign applications. So when we're talking about these open organizations that exist everywhere, you need to figure out how you can build things that don't have dependencies. I mean, was it Tuesday of this week, Cloudflare went down, right? And then it was like a couple months ago, AWS went down. And, it's one thing for certain companies to be, reliant on these big tech companies. But if you're trying to build open organizations, or if you're a government and you're trying to create sovereignty for your software, you need to figure out a stack that is not reliant on the big tech. Vetra is a new stack to really build any application. We originally built it for MakerDAO and Sky as organizational operational software. So, any company over 50 people has very, very customized software, right? That's written directly for them. That's whether Salesforce, SAP. So Vetra was our kind of way of trying to build this for open organizations. But it's also something that really can really power any type of application on the internet. So when people talk about DAO tooling sucks, we need more DAO tooling, this is the foundation that you can build the DAO tooling on. So it's automated, integrated with Web3, it's sovereign, it's decentralized, and it can scale with you. So unification, I guess that was this week or last week, I can't remember now. It's all coming together. Unification, I think, was a really, really interesting proposal and finally got people talking a bit more about DAOs in it. So just to summarize it, Labs is sunsetting its private monetization. So basically, this is a proposal by Hayden Adams to the high level is they're going to turn the fee switch on Uniswap, and they're going to redirect all value in the ecosystem to the Uni token, right? So they're going to sunset the front end fee that Uniswap Labs has been doing. They're actually going to pay some of it back, I guess, through a Uni burn, and they're and whether it's the wallet, they have an L2, they have all of these different things. They're all revolving around the Uni token. This is a really big difference in how I think DeFi has been built and structured. I think for a long time everyone was thinking of DeFi. It's mostly about the products, not necessarily about how the products are built. But this is really a new way to be building those. If you look, the next one. And I think there's a lot to be said about Uniswap, and Uniswap Labs has been very, very centralized. But I think at the core level, I think this proposal is like an embracement of open source capitalism, right? Because they are redirecting revenue from across the ecosystem into a singular asset, and I think that's a huge step forward. But it doesn't necessarily tackle the organizational side of things, right? You still have Labs as a very central entity that you don't necessarily have assurances that they are not going to try to extract rent in some other way. But I think the alignment around a token as a value driver is a really, really powerful force. And I think that will probably be copied by other one. And to me, it seems like an example of this open source capitalism in the wild, and how you can drive value, unify and align people through a single token that is value. I think that was it. Thank you for coming and hearing my talk.